guys, we hit 10K subscribers. I'm really excited. It hasn't really sunk in yet. It happened a few days ago as of me filming this, and it hasn't really like fully internalized yet. It's just crazy, like 10,000 people. That's insane. Like, that's insane. And I will never be able to express in words how much it means to me that you guys want to watch my goofy little videos. I have so much fun making them for you. I cannot wait to continue on this journey. And so I thought, to celebrate the moment, let's do a Q&A. So over on my Instagram, I asked you guys, what's up? Ask me a question. So follow me on Instagram if you don't want to miss these in the future. But I thought we could just sit, I could answer your questions. We could talk about some of my like ideas for the future of the channel while we get ready to film a video. I actually think I am going to post this one first, so I won't tell you what I'm filming, but when you see that video, you'll recognize the look. So without further ado, let's get started. Should I include people's usernames? I'm going to default to not, because I don't want to like dox people in their accounts, but comment below if it's more normal for people to like include the username of the Instagram person who asked with the question. I just don't want to like put anybody's username out there if they don't want it out there. Okay. You guys asked some really great questions too. I was kind of expecting, well, I don't know what I was expecting, but I'm excited to answer some of these. The very first question was, what is your favorite mythological creature? I had to think about this for a while, okay? My gut was dragon. I just really like dragons. I think they're super cool. But then I was like, well, that's kind of a cliche answer. That's the first thing that comes to mind because that's such like a classic fantasy creature. Is there anything else that I like more than that that's just not like coming to mind? So I sat and thought about this for a while. And you know what, you guys? Maybe I'm a little bit basic in this way, but I love me a dragon. I think they're so cool. They're giant fire-breathing lizards that live like hundreds of years, but their mannerisms are often described as very cat-like, which as a cat lover, I appreciate. I love when people like bond with the dragons. I love when they can like speak to the dragons. I love it when the dragons are sassy. So yeah, I'm a big fan of dragons, to be completely honest with you. I just think they're sick. And so I'm gonna go with dragons, even if that's a bit of like a cliche answer. I don't know why I'm getting so defensive. Like you guys are gonna judge me for my choice in mythological creature. I don't think you care. Well, I do think you care because you asked, but I don't think you're gonna be like dragons. For real, girl. So the next question is, when did you really get into reading? This is such an interesting one. We're gonna talk about this for a minute here because I kind of have two answers. This might not seem like that complicated a question, but I went the longest time not really talking about this at all because I just think it sounds like either kind of made up or like I'm trying to like brag or something. And so I just kind of like default to not telling people about this, but through the channel, I've talked to a lot more people in person about it. And now that I'm an adult, people react way different. When I was a kid and I would talk about this, obviously kids would react like kids. So maybe I should stop assuming that like the adults around me are going to react like kids do. But I have hyperlexia, which is like the opposite of dyslexia. Not in the way that you think. Reading ability in children is judged in comparison to their ability to speak and understand speech, because if you have a child that has a developmental delay and that delay is in speech, if they can't read as well, is that a reading disability or is it that they're struggling to understand speech? And obviously it's going to be different for every person, but essentially they don't consider something to be like a reading related disability until it's like there's a difference between your ability to read and your ability to comprehend spoken speech. So dyslexia is when your ability to read sits behind your ability to speak and your understanding of words. Hyperlexia is when your ability to read supersedes your ability to understand spoken speech. And so you'll be able to read words that you don't know or understand. Like you're literally just reading the sounds, but you don't know what that word says and you don't understand a lot of what you're reading. Sometimes it ties to advanced reading in adults. So anyway, I am hyperlexic, but I didn't know that. I didn't even know that there was a word for it. I don't know if you guys have ever had this experience with your parents where like they find stuff out about you when you're a kid and then they tell you like parts of it, but they don't explain everything. So I always knew that I learned how to read like really young. I was 3, but I also knew, and this is the part that like people used to not believe me when I was a kid, so I just like stopped telling people. But according to my parents, nobody ever like taught me how to read, just like could read one day and everybody was like, what the hell? So the full story from my mom's perspective is that I had a preschool teacher that was convinced I could read. And she kept telling my mom that I could read because I always knew what stuff was mine. So I knew what like table set was mine or like where my locker was or whatever. And she was like, I think she's like reading her name. And my mom was like, she's 3. And basically was like, you know, kids can learn to like recognize their name before they really understand what like letters are and like what they mean and like reading and all of that. And because Meredith is like a longer name that starts with an M and ends with TH, so it's kind of like unique in its structure in a way. There's other longer M names, but they always end in different letters. My mom was like pretty convinced that what I was doing was like recognizing the pattern that was my name, and just like knew that that like pattern of letters meant me, even if I didn't like understand what a letter was, if that makes sense. Like I just knew that that like combination of symbols meant me. And so she like wrote it off. She was like, yeah, whatever, my daughter can't read. What are you talking about? She's 3 years old. Which, to be fair, is probably how I would react if I didn't know about this. And I don't think the teacher like knew there was a word for it. I think she was just like, yo, I like low-key think your daughter can read. Anyway, at one point my mom and I were at McDonald's, and you know how at McDonald's they have the trash can that says trash on it. So apparently I just pointed at it and I said trash. I was freshly 3, I'm pretty sure. I was still at an age where my mom like knew every word that I knew. And so she knew that I didn't know the word trash, because apparently the word we used in our house was garbage. And so I pointed at it and I said the word trash, and she knew that it wasn't because I just like knew that was a trash can. So I was just doing that. And she was like, oh my God, can my daughter read? And she took me home and sat me down with a picture book, and sure enough. And so that's how my parents like found out I could read. I'm not even joking. I was scrolling TikTok like 2 years ago, and I saw this woman just like casually talking, and she said something about being hyperlexic. And I know like word etymology, right? So I hear her say hyperlexic, and I'm like, okay. I learned how to read really young, and I read very fast. That's the other part of it. So we'll dive into that in a second. But I was like, no way. There's like a word for this. There's like a thing for this. And I dove into like a research spiral about it. And I ended up going to my mom, and I was like, Mom, they have a word for this. It's hyperlexic. I'm hyperlexic. And my mom was like, yeah, I know. She was like, I knew that. Probably tied to your ADHD. I was like, you could have told me that. So anyway, I don't know if you guys have ever had that experience with your parents, but that was really funny. Okay, I definitely need more powder. There's like a ton of stuff sticking to my face. That's how you know you're a little too dewy. You know what I mean? So anyway, that's how I learned how to read. And pretty much from that point on, I had my nose buried in a book as a kid. This was like my predominant feature. Moved on to like kind of Magic Treehouse sort of books when I was still in preschool, and I read really fast. And that was even true when I was a kid. So that's really the only way that the like hyperlexia, I guess you would say, manifests now. For some people, kind of like with dyslexia, whether or not it sticks around depends on the kid. So like some kids with dyslexia, it's like their reading is kind of behind their speech development, but then they grow out of it in a way, and they end up kind of catching up, and at some point in their adulthood end up able to read at the level of their speech. And then some kids struggle with it for their whole lives. Hyperlexia is kind of the same way. Some people don't really notice any difference once everybody catches up to them in their reading ability. And it's not all it's cracked up to be either. It's defined as a learning disability for a reason, because I learned a lot of my words through reading them instead of hearing them. And so I mispronounced words until I was like, admittedly, still now. I mispronounce words as a joke, but I'll admit to you, it's kind of a cover. I developed that joke, if you guys have ever heard me do that, because I do that organically sometimes. And so at some point I realized that if I started doing that as a bit, then people might not realize if I was doing it seriously, because I just like sometimes jokingly mispronounce a word. One of the ones that is like burned into my memory because the person it happened with like would not stop bringing it up for a while afterwards was contemplate. I would say contemplate. And I was like in my 20s and I said that to someone and they were like, what on earth did you just say? And then I didn't live it down for a while. So I remember that one. But that's not the only thing. I also have like, I just personally, and I don't know if this is tied to the hyperlexia or not. I'm just exposing to you guys some of the things I think about myself in my brain. I also have pretty severe like auditory processing problems that I didn't discover until also recently. Actually, it was COVID, and I don't at all mean to sound like an anti-masker. I think masks are great and we needed them at the time, and I'm happy people were wearing them, and I was never upset at people for wearing them. But I will tell you that everybody wearing masks all the time taught me how much I lip read in order to understand what people are saying. And I realized that it's like a lot. I lip read a lot to help me understand. I don't necessarily have to. It really depends on the scenario. So like if I'm just hanging out with somebody, sorry, I'm just doing my lip liner. If I'm just hanging out with somebody one-on-one, then I have no problems. I can look away from them and I can usually hear them and it's fine. Or in like a lecture setting, I actually am usually fine because they tend to be like quieter, where there's just like like a speaker and there's no other noise, if it's a loud environment and there's like other noise going on, I cannot hear you. I cannot hear you. I'm reading your lips. And I didn't even know that. And it's funny too, because I remember as a kid, like one of the major pieces of feedback I got from adults was that I made way too much eye contact. I made like an uncomfortable amount of eye contact, and I realized that it's maybe because I was reading people's lips in my periphery. So I'm understanding more and more about young Meredith and the things she developed. I don't know if this is what a psychiatrist would say, because I've never actually floated this theory past my psychiatrist. My assumption is that when my brain was developing, my brain for some reason decided to devote a ton of its like language neurons to reading and like not as many to understanding speech. And so to this day, I'm able to read really fast. And that's really the way that it manifests for me. So like I was saying about hyperlexia, like some people kind of grow out of being advanced in their reading and some people keep it. So I still would say that my ability to understand written language goes far beyond my ability to understand speech. And in fact, another thing I'll say, I'm just rambling about this at this point, is that the YouTube channel has actually taught me how often I like just casually use the wrong word. I don't know if you guys have noticed that. I'll be in the middle of a sentence and I won't quite use the right word. I'll just use a word like slightly off from it that sounds almost exactly like the word I wanted to say. Oh wait, I'm not doing pigtails. What am I doing? I needed the top parted, but not the back. Okay. But I am going to do I want to put in this clip here. So I'm going to slick into like 2 ponytails and then try to put that into the clip and see if I can make it look all cute and pretty. Because I want it to slick back more like this than like down. But anyway, what was I saying? Oh, so I do that a lot when I'm speaking too. I mispronounce words and I don't always use the right word in the sentence that I'm saying. So I think my speech is like a little bit underdeveloped if I'm being so for real with you. And then I think my reading is overdeveloped. I can read really fast, and I think I'm just beginning to grasp even now with the channel like how much faster I read than the average person. But I'll admit to you guys, and maybe this is like a rude thing to say, but sometimes when I'm showing someone a meme, I am truly kind of like shocked and appalled by how long it takes them to read it. Is that a mean thing to say? I don't know, like sometimes I'm like holding up my phone trying to show someone something, and I just like have a moment where I'm like, wow, it took you a while to laugh. It took you a while to get through what that said. And it then led me retroactively to wonder if people think that I don't read the things that they show me. Like if they show me something on their phone that I just like kind of laugh as a default and that I didn't actually read it. I don't know. I promise I did read it. I just read fast. Actually, one other funny story about me as a kid, because I also intended to tell this one. I've just like rambled about this forever. But my mom used to have a rule that I was not allowed to read in parking lots, because what I would do is I would like, if she dragged me to the store when I was in the middle of a really good book, I would follow her around the store with the book like this. Like here, do I have one? I have oil all over my hands. Hang on. Like I would basically take a book like this and just like walk behind my mom in the store like this. And I would like use her as a guide. I bumped into her so much. Like I said, this is stuff I like never talked about for the longest time, because I just like have so many like bad memories of people being like, that's not true, you're making that up. At some point recently, I was talking to somebody about like the things that get ingrained in you as a kid. And I was talking about like texting in parking lots. And I was like, I didn't grow up with phones that could text, right? Like phones that could text got invented. Well, I mean, they could text, but you had to like type a bunch, I guess is probably more like they existed. I just didn't have one until I was like 11 or 12. And so when I was a kid, since I would do this thing with books, when I would go to the store with my mom, like she had this rule that I wasn't allowed to do it in the parking lot. So I could read in the store, and I used to get car sick, but I would try to read in the car anyway and just make myself sick. So I could read in the store, I could read in the car, but I could not read in the parking lot. In the parking lot, I had to be holding my mommy's hand and watching for cars, which I think is a fair and valid and balanced rule. And I appreciate my mother for that. And so even before I had a phone, my mom taught me like not to be distracted by something in my hand when I was like walking through a parking lot, basically. And so I was like telling somebody about this, because essentially what I was telling them is like that got ingrained in me. And now even still, I don't really go on my phone when I'm walking through parking lots or like crossing the street or something, because my mom taught me this. And the person's reaction was like, your mom let you do that? Like, that's kind of weird. Your mom let you do that? And I was like, is that weird? I mean, yeah, I guess it is. It's like a weird thing for a kid to do, but I didn't think it was weird for my mom to like let me. So then I asked my mom about it. This was like 6 or 7 months ago. I was like, why did you let me do that? Because I also know I used to like bump into her all the time, because she would like stop abruptly and I would just like run into her because I wasn't watching. And she was like, are you kidding? First of all, why wouldn't I let you do that? What do I care? But second, you were so much less annoying at stores when you were doing that because you weren't like asking me to buy you treats. So instead of having to deal with me being like, can we get Oreos? Can we get Cheerios? Can we get, I don't know, whatever else I wanted as a kid? She just had to deal with me like bumping into her back every once in a while. And so from her perspective, this was like a good trade-off. And she actually would prefer when I would do that instead of when I would be like paying attention to what we were doing at the store. So anyway, all of that to say that to answer your question, I got into reading very young. I started really reading as an avid hobby at like 3. And then I pretty much had my nose in a book until I was at least 12 or 13. And around then, I got really busy with activities. And I'll admit to you, if I'm just opening my soul to you in this YouTube video right now and telling you my whole life story, I had a little bit of like a resentment towards it at times because I was kind of a weird kid. And like, especially in elementary school, I didn't have like a ton of friends and I read at recess a lot. And so even though I liked reading, I felt like it made me kind of weird that I did, which is funny because at the time reading would have been significantly more common as a hobby in kids, I think, than it would be now because we didn't have iPads, you know? Still, I like thought it made me kind of weird to like to read. And I also kind of thought of it at the time as like a useless skill. That combined with the fact that I started like thinking I should like, if I'm going to be a reader, I should read classics. And I kind of got away from reading like the romance and fantasy that I really liked to read as a kid and tried to like get myself to read more like educational or like smart books. That sort of combined with this feeling that it made me kind of weird to really like to read, and also that it was like kind of a useless thing for me to be nurturing, which is so crazy to think about now with the direction my life is headed, that I ended up just kind of like not really reading anymore as a hobby. I didn't really pick it back up until I was in college. I had an internship in Minnesota. And I had a friend who I was at a bookstore with, and I was telling her not the whole story about like the hyperlexia or anything like that, but just that she was talking about reading a lot. And I was like, oh, I'm so jealous of you. When I was a kid, I used to read all the time, but I've just gotten out of the habit of doing it. And she was the one who kind of said to me, well, what are you reading? And I was like, well, like these are the books I have on my shelf right now. And I keep telling myself I'm going to pick them up and then I don't. She was the one who said to me, I had kind of thought to myself for a while, like, oh, I need to be reading smarter books. And so I like put myself in a reading slump because I was like picking books I didn't really want to read. And so then we were at a bookstore because we were just kind of like wandering around this like mall area, and we had wandered into a bookstore. Outlander was sitting on the shelf. And she was like, have you ever read Outlander? And I was like, no. And she's like, oh my God, it's like everything you're saying that you liked in books as a kid. It's like that, but for adults. It's adventure, it's fantasy, it's romance. You're going to love it. You should read it. And I was like, okay, all right, girl, I trust you. And I bought it. And that night I started reading it. And I was like reminded of what it actually feels like to be like so sucked into a book that I like don't want to do anything else. That feeling that made me follow my mom around in a store reading, because like the idea of putting the book down for the hour we were going to driving and then at the grocery store and then driving back was like so horrible to me because I just needed to know what happens. Like Outlander reawoke those feelings in me. This is the hair. How'd we do? I'll have to check it before I film because I don't know. I mean, it definitely looks fine from the front, which is mostly what you're going to see. But anyway, I love Outlander. I love the series. I think it's so good. It was such a good book series to pull me back into reading. And so shout out to my friend who recommended that. And the ironic part was I was actually about to drive back to Phoenix and my mom was flying out to help me move back because that's like a big drive. It's like 3 days. And I was like, I don't know, 20, 21. So I ordered the box set of the first 4 books to my parents' house, and I asked my mom to take out book 2 and bring it with her when she flew out to help me drive back so that I could read it in the evenings on our drive. And she was like, oh yeah, no problem. But I didn't tell her what the book series was. I just said I got into a book series. And then when she got the package, she texted me and was like, you are joking. I was obsessed with this book series in the 90s. And so my mom actually read Outlander like as it was releasing. Like she read it when it was like being published. I mean, it still technically is being published. I think book 9 just came out, but there's significantly more time in between the book releases now. Whereas in the 90s, it was getting like released as a series that people were like keeping up with and reading. And my mom was reading it at the time. And so it was just kind of like perfect because not only did it like remind me what I love about reading, but it turns out that my mom is super into that book too. And so then my mom and I on the whole drive back to Phoenix were like talking about what I'd read up to then. And we have really bonded over both really liking that book series. Brings back a lot of good memories of me like bonding with my mom over the things I was reading. I think it was like Outlander somehow ended up being everything I remember loving about reading as a kid, both just the book itself and the experience it gave me, but also like the bonding with the people around me and being able to like talk about it, and all of us like kind of enjoying the book. My mom especially, because my mom is who I did that a lot with as a kid. So yeah, that was what got me like back into reading. So I would say I read really consistently as a hobby from like 3 to I would say 12 or 13, and then had essentially a decade-long reading slump. And around the age, I would have turned 21 over the course of that summer. So somewhere in that 2021 range, started reading again as a hobby, and I am now 26. That's probably more information than you ever thought you were going to get out of that question, but there you go. Okay, so we're 2 questions in. Great, going really fast. And the next one's going to be a long one too. Predictions for the future of the Hunger Games franchise. Man, I thought about this for so long last night, and I think I have a fairly good prediction. Although, as we know, historically, me and predictions with the Hunger Games series have not gone well. However, when I explain to you my logic and my reasoning behind what I'm gonna say, I think you guys might agree with me, okay? So I think in order to figure out what Suzanne Collins is going to write next within the Hunger Games universe, we shouldn't just think about the characters that we know people would be interested in books on. We also have to think about the message that she would want to send and try and tie that to a person that people would be interested in reading a series about. If you've watched all my Hunger Games videos, I am beating a dead horse here. But she wrote the original trilogy to try and talk about the idea of a justified war and justified violence. So are there situations in which violence is justified? In her opinion, yes, when you're freeing an oppressed people from an oppressive government. And so she kind of wrote this book series to talk about this subject in a way that was approachable for children. But if we take a step back, if we also think about what was happening at the time that she would have released that first series, both President Bush and President Obama were not exactly the best with their policies in the Middle East. And Suzanne Collins herself, being the daughter of a veteran and having traveled around a lot as a child and been introduced to a lot of what war does to other countries, like she went to other countries that the US was at war with when she was a child because her dad was an officer and he would be stationed there. And so she would be there with him. This theory that I had in the back of my head that I never really said during a lot of the series is I wondered how much of what she did or wrote was kind of a reaction to Bush and Obama's policies with the Middle East and the war on terror. It's well known that the capital is supposed to be a metaphor for America. America is the capital, right? And the rest of the world is the rest of Pan Am, like the districts. And so she clearly was making commentary about America and our foreign policy, but I've wondered how much of the like justified war rebellion sort of thing was tied to the war on terror. All of that to say that then in 2020, she comes out with a book that is an origin story that might explain the mentality of a young man that ends up becoming a dictator someday, that would have been written right at the tail end of somebody's first presidency, right? What drove her to write that book, having not written a Hunger Games book for a long time, right? Like what made her want to maybe explain the mentality behind somebody who goes on to become a dictator? What drove her to do that? We'll never know. She had a book come out this year, the year of our Lord 2025, that talked about propaganda. Why would she want to discuss a subject like that in the modern day? So I guess what I'm saying is I feel like whether or not she goes on to write more in the Hunger Games series will tie to the political and economic state of the world. I hope things get better enough that she doesn't feel driven to do that, but I fear it won't. If I had to guess, like some of the things that at least I'm seeing, that if I were the author of a dystopian novel series that was like making commentary on the dystopia that exists in our society, I might talk about brainwashing and like how propaganda can brainwash, because we learned about propaganda in this book, and we learned, this book being Sunrise on the Reaping, and we learned how governments kind of use propaganda to change what happens, and like the message that gets spread to the masses isn't necessarily what's actually going on. But we didn't talk a whole lot about how that brainwashes people a little bit, and how you might be indoctrinated into believing that your government is doing the best that they can, or your favorite politician, when maybe that's not the case, right? And so I'm wondering if there isn't some kind of message in writing a book from the perspective of somebody who was indoctrinated into that world and then had a change of heart. Do you see where I'm going with this? I think one of the careers is who the next book is going to be about, and I think of all of the characters we have, Finnick fits the bill. Finnick was a career. He was from District 4. District 4 is one of the districts that sends careers. So he would have been raised and trained to go into the Hunger Games and would have volunteered to have been the tribute and have chosen to go into the Hunger Games. But then, as we know, during the events of the original trilogy, he was fighting on the side of the rebellion. So what happened, right? There's a story there. How did Finnick go from being a career, or we presume a career because he was from District 4, to being somebody that was helping with the rebellion? If I had to like shot in the dark who I think the next book is going to be about, I think it will be Finnick. I think we'll get a Finnick origin, and I think it will be focused less on his Hunger Games and more actually on his upbringing as a career, his indoctrination, his training, his belief in the Hunger Games, his belief that the Hunger Games are the right thing to do, then him going into the games, maybe understanding how brutal they actually are and seeing the death firsthand, and how that impacts him and how that changes him, and how he maybe comes out the other side of it a less indoctrinated participant in this whole capital sort of vibe, and actually is very like against the capital after having these experiences. I think that that would be a good choice for next book. I don't know if that's what she would do. I would love to read that. I think that would be really cool. A lot of people have said that eventually she's going to do Plutarch. I do think eventually she will do Plutarch, but here's my theory on it, okay? I don't think she'll do Plutarch until the very end. I think once we get the Plutarch book, we're done and there's no more Hunger Games books. And I'll tell you why. I think we'll probably only get one or two others, maybe a Finnick, maybe somebody else between Snow and Haymitch to get a little bit more of those like early games. And then I think what we'll get is a big Plutarch story that ties it all together, where we follow Plutarch over very many years, because he seems to be the only person who was involved in the rebellion from the start. I mean, there's Beatty and there's Wirus and all of them, so maybe we'll get one of their perspectives instead, but we've never had a game maker's perspective either. And so I think that eventually she will do a long, I don't know if the book itself will be long, but it'll be a long span over Plutarch's life, where we'll see him as a game maker plotting this revolution and then acting it out. But I think if that's her plan for Plutarch, I think it'll be the last book she writes in the series, because I think then what she'll do is kind of connect everything together with this overarching Plutarch timeline, where we already have all of this groundwork for all of the stuff that's happening, because we know all of these other things from all these other Hunger Games books. So those are my two big theories. I think we'll get a Finnick, and I think we'll get a Plutarch book, and I think she might write one other one that takes place maybe before Haymitch's Hunger Games, or she'll find another character that she wants to tell a story about. Maybe we'll get Beatty's, maybe we'll get Wirus's or Mag's. Now that we've seen that all three of them were kind of involved in Haymitch's Hunger Games, maybe we'll get their origins too, and then she'll do a Plutarch to connect them all. So that's my theory. Those are my predictions. I was not right about any of my predictions before, so I don't know why you would want Hunger Games predictions from me, but there they are. We'll see if I turn out to be correct. We'll see if she even writes anything else. Actually, let me look up if she's... Yeah, so it looks like Reddit is saying as of 11 days ago that Suzanne hasn't said anything yet about whether or not she's writing any more books. Everyone wants a Finnick book next. Oh, I guess that wasn't that creative an idea from me. I have the feeling the next book will be similar to Ballad, as in a prequel not many were expecting. A Plutarch book is likely. Or maybe she plans a sequel to Ballad. Well, here I thought I was being all like clever and creative, but I guess on the Hunger Games Reddit, they've come up with the same things I have. Oh, but there's only one comment, so maybe it isn't that common. So there was one person who asked my must-reads, and then there was someone else who asked my top 3 favorite books. To me, these are different. Favorite books are a subjective thing, right? It's just like the books that you love the most in this world. And unfortunately, I've already spoken about a lot of my like favorites. Twilight is one of them. Hunger Games is another, just because I have such a nostalgic attachment to them from reading them when I was a kid. But that's no fun. Like, it's no fun to just like bring up books I've already read. So I tried to think of books like outside of those two that would like also be favorites, so that I could give you guys something new. So again, favorites is subjective. I'm not saying these are the best books ever written, but I'm saying these are ones that I have some kind of personal attachment to, or something that puts them kind of on my Mount Rushmore. Number one book that comes to mind is actually Beach Read. I will never forgive you guys for what you did to Emily Henry, okay? Beach Read was Emily Henry's, I don't think it was her debut, but I think it was her first like contemporary romance to really take off. And Beach Read is about a woman who writes romance novels who finds herself in a writing slump. She runs into somebody from college who's also a writer, who's also in a writing slump, and they decide to trade genres to see who can write a book in the other person's genre quicker, to try and like break themselves out of these writing slumps they're in. And so the premise is really fun sounding, and it's called Beach Read, and the cover is super cartoony. So everyone was expecting it to be this like lovely, relaxing relaxed beach read, some might say. And so when it ended up being a little bit more serious, like it's not like a serious romance. It's not like an Outlander or anything like that, but it does just cover some heavier topics. And I think a lot of people went into it not expecting that, and she got a lot of backlash for it. And ever since then, she has written like the fluffiest, most surface level romance. And there's a time and place for that, okay? There is a time and place for that, and I'm not insulting that sort of literature. You guys have seen my TBRs, okay? You've seen the books that I read. You know I love me a goofy, silly, fun romance. Love it, okay? But there's so much of that. The market is flooded with fun, silly, contemporary romance that you can read that's like brain off time, okay? It is so hard to find romances like Beach Read, and the fact that Emily Henry is capable of writing them and then basically wrote one, got a mountain of backlash, and then has defaulted to writing what everybody else writes so that she doesn't get that backlash in the future. Honestly, fuck y'all. I will literally never forgive you for that. Beach Read is a masterpiece. It's infinitely better than any other book that she's written. Sometimes I want to read a romance that is intelligent, for lack of a better word to use, and actually has like a deeper meaning to it and is trying to like drive a deeper message and is using romance as its medium to do that. Or something like Outlander, where it's just a more like fantasy, almost like literature sort of feeling in a book, instead of it just being like campy, fun, and fluffy. And so I cannot believe that, again, Emily Henry is an author that is like capable of writing that sort of book and has kind of defaulted to writing the same fluffy, goofy nonsense that is just oversaturated in the romance market right now. It's so frustrating to me. Write more stuff like Beach Read, Emily. And if you went into it not expecting it to be what it is, then I understand why you were disappointed, but just because you were disappointed doesn't make it a bad book. I've always felt that way because I read it around the time that it was a big topic of conversation. But why is it like one of my favorites? Why does it rank on my Mount Rushmore? Because this isn't much of a spoiler because you're introduced to this in the first chapter of the book, but part of the story is that our main character's dad has passed away somewhat suddenly and somewhat recently, and she found out some information after his passing that makes her kind of angry at him. And so she's processing these emotions where she's sort of angry at a father that she's also grieving. And that's the majority of what the book is about. And the romance is part of the driver for our character to really go through her emotional growth with what happened with her dad. And so that's what's so beautiful and lovely about it. And I read it at a time that my dad had cancer. And when I say at a time, I mean like he was very freshly diagnosed, and he's fine, he's doing great. But he was very freshly diagnosed. It was all very scary, and I was processing, and it was all very new. I literally think I was like a few weeks into knowing all of the information that I knew and how serious it was and all of that. Beach Read gave me the words for what I was feeling that I didn't even know I like needed to process yet. Like I was so fresh into everything that was happening that I didn't even realize that I really had unresolved feelings that I needed to work through, if that makes sense. You just get very survivalistic, and it's like, all right, well, this is what we have to do to treat this, and so we're going to do this, and that's what we're doing. And then I had put a holdout on this book before I found out that my dad was sick, and then after finding out that my dad was sick, my hold went up on Libby, and I didn't even think about it. I just was like, oh, well, cool. Everybody's been giving this kind of mixed reviews. I guess we'll see what I think about it, but I'll pick it up. And I didn't even think about like the dad dying sort of underplot, if you will. And I'm glad I didn't think about it, because I maybe wouldn't have picked it up if I had, but I'm really happy that I did read it, because like I said, it gave me all the words for what I was feeling in that moment that I didn't like know that I needed. And so I have a very emotional and personal connection to it. But unironically, like outside of that, I do think it is Emily Henry's best book, and I will never forgive y'all for bullying her out of writing books like that, because they're so much better. And she's tried to bring grief into some of her other books, but she's just tried to keep it with that lighter and fluffier air, and it just doesn't work. It's not cohesive. I want her to go back to writing books like that. Personally, that would be my choice. So Beach Read is up there. Other favorites of mine are Outlander, which is a action and adventure, somewhat fantasy, sort of not series about a nurse from the 40s that ends up getting sent back in time and falling in love with a 1700s Scottish Highlander named Jamie, and he's wonderful and dreamy. And there still is like no romance hero quite like him. Jamie is peak. So I love Outlander. And then I would say the Kiss Quotient. So Kiss Quotient is the first of like the fluffier sort of contemporary romances that I ever read, and it set the bar so high that for a while afterwards I was like, maybe Like, I thought maybe I found a new genre for myself, but maybe I just really liked this book. But I've since found other books that were really good as well. Kiss Quotient is really, really good. The Kiss Quotient is about an autistic girl that struggles to date because she has a lot of issues with touch. She's very like sensitive to touch. And so she hires an escort to teach her how to have sex. This sounds like it's going to be ridiculous and maybe anger inducing if you know a lot about autism, but it's actually quite lovely. It's written by a woman who is herself autistic and also has an autistic daughter, and it's an incredibly beautiful read. And it really is like everything that is phenomenal about the contemporary romance genre, and I'm still a really big fan of it, and I recommend it to a lot of people as their first adult contemporary romance, because as a part of the story, the girl is kind of slowly introduced to different things by the guy. And so I think in a way it becomes a very good book to also kind of intro people into books that have smut, because over the course of the book, it gets smuttier and smuttier as our main girl gets more and more comfortable trying things. And so it's like kind of a really good, like, baby's first contemporary romance. And by baby, I mean, of course, adults, but like adults' first contemporary romance, because it kind of like works you into it. But it's smutty early in, but it like works you into it being like very smutty. Although one of my friends read it and he's just obsessed with the fact that I think the main character thinks she has like porn nipples or something like that, or like porn tits. And one of my guy friends that read it just thinks that's like the most hilarious thing ever. So I guess be warned, at some point there's like a joke about porn nipples that he thought was kind of ridiculous. But anyway, so those are my favorites. As far as my must reads, this is a hard one because I'm a firm believer that everybody should read the things they enjoy reading. So I think it's really hard to like blanket recommend like must reads because it would depend on the person. However, there are a few books that come to mind that I'm going to mention. The first is Come As You Are. This is a book about women's sexual health and wellness, and it is so informative, okay? If you are a woman or if you have sex with women, you should read this. Making it a must read, I think, because it's truly so informative. So much of what we understand about sex and how it works is from the male perspective. I think everybody should read it. I think it's so informative. And like I said, if you ever sexually interact with vaginas, you should read this book. It's super informative. So that's a must read. Another one that I kind of put on my must read list, In the Dream House by Carmen Maria Machado. And this isn't just because I do think, like, if you're asking me the two best written books I think I've ever read, it's In the Dream House and Pachinko by Min Jin Lee. But within The Dream House, the reason I also think it's a must read is because it's a memoir about Carmen Maria Machado's experiences in an abusive relationship. And the book itself is really short and it's told through these vignettes. So the pages themselves don't always even have like a full page of text on them. It's incredibly beautifully done and it's really wonderful, but it's also very informative about abuse. And so again, with these must reads, I'm like kind of thinking to myself, like, well, what's information that I kind of think everybody should have? Because not everybody is going to enjoy every single book. So I don't think there's like a book that's strictly for enjoyment that's a must read. But I think something like In the Dream House is so informative about abuse. And I think there's a lot of people who just cannot conceptualize what it would be like in an abusive relationship. And there's a lot of victim blaming because there's a lot of like, well, why didn't you just leave? And so I think informing yourself as to the reasons why somebody maybe wouldn't leave, if that is like a thought process that you have, especially because I'm going to say this too, I'm getting on my soapbox. I have no idea why we're getting so serious in a Q&A. But I know a lot of women IRL who are convinced that they themselves would never end up in an abusive relationship. And then they'll swear they're not victim blaming, right? They'll be like, no, it's not that I think that there's anything wrong with victims. It's just that I do think I'm different from them. It's just that I do think there is something about them that makes them a victim, that makes me not a victim. So even though I like fundamentally understand it's not their fault and I'm not blaming them, I still think there's something fundamentally different about them that made them a victim that wouldn't happen to me, because I just would never let someone treat me like that. And it's like, clear, you don't get it. Like, you don't get it, actually. And like, I myself have luckily never been a victim of abuse, but I don't think I'm immune to it. Like, I do think that it would be possible for me to end up in an abusive relationship, because it's possible for all of us to end up in an abusive relationship, because there is nothing that differentiates us from the victims of abuse. It is manipulation. There's a large mental aspect to it. And I think it's important for us to understand that, because if you don't understand that, you won't run from the red flags. The red flags will show up. Those are the signs that somebody's going to become abusive, and you won't run at those because you'll think to yourself, well, if they ever turn out to be abusive, I'll just leave. But by the time that happens, you're not in the mental state to leave anymore. It's important to understand that there is nothing that differentiates you from somebody who ends up being a victim of domestic violence. Victims of domestic violence were once upon a time people who thought they would never let a partner hit them. There's nothing that separates you from them. And so if you think there's something that separates you from them,
that would make it so you wouldn't end up in that situation than they did, then you are victim blaming. And you do think that there is something about those victims that made them a victim that you don't have. And that makes you more susceptible. That makes you more likely to end up being a victim. So I think that kind of stuff is really important to understand. And I think In the Dream House is it's such a beautiful work. The fact that she was able to take something so traumatic and so horrific and turn it into something so beautiful and heart-wrenching and just stunning. And like, I like almost can't put into words how impressive it is and how wonderful it is. And I think it's got really important information in there. And I think it's information that everybody should have, because I've just had too many conversations with too many people IRL who are just convinced that this would never happen to them. I think she does a really good job getting across why that's not true. Do I have another must read? Like I said, must read is hard for me because it's just like, who must read anything? So I guess I'll just say Pachinko. Pachinko is a multi-generational story about a Korean family that immigrates to Japan right before World War II. It's heartbreaking and really sad, but I'm not usually a fan of very sad books, and I was a massive fan of this one. And so I think there's something to be said for like the fact that there's still a little bit of hope in there, because I really struggle when there's like no hope whatsoever. And so I haven't read it in a long time, but I recommend it to a lot of people. And the only person that's ever taken me up on it is a friend of mine who then went on to say it was like the saddest book he'd ever read. And he was like, why did you do that to me? And I was like, that's weird, because I don't even like think of it as a sad book in my memory. I just think of it as a very beautifully written book, but it is very sad. So be warned, it is very sad. But I think it's a gorgeous read, and it's really wonderfully written, and it's one of my favorites. So I guess I'll say that for my last must read. Have I ever read Don Quixote? This one made me giggle. So here's the thing. I've not read Don Quixote, but I do own it. When I first started my channel, I bought these two books because I had this idea in my head that I was going to have these multiple series running where I would be reading young adult books from my childhood, but I would also be reading classics, and I would be doing like classic book analysis and then peppering in just like random other books that catch my eye, catch my fancy, right? And I made one video about Les Mis where I talked about the first 300 pages for an hour, and then I haven't picked it up since, and it's been a year and a half, and people are still asking me about it. People are still asking me to continue Les Mis, and I will. I know it sounds crazy that I keep saying that when it's been a year and a half, but I promise you I will. I don't know if I'm going to keep doing it in installments or if I'm just going to read the whole thing and make one video on it at this point. But what I will say is that the reason why I haven't continued it, I guess, is because it just takes a while to read. And so I can't really do it the way that I would do my other videos where I like read. I'm kind of like on a cadence of like reading a book a week for the channel. And I occasionally do videos that aren't related to me reading books, but a lot of my content is, I read this book, let me talk about it for an hour. And it's hard to do that with classics. Like, I have a way harder time reading classics. And I think going back to talking about like my hyperlexia and stuff, I have wondered if it's tied to that. Like, if I'm not just so used to being able to just like really zoom through books, that when I'm reading a book that is a little bit denser and the language is a little bit more foreign to me, that I have to think a lot harder. And I think I read at the speed that normal people read, and it makes me feel like it's taking forever to read the book. And then I end up feeling really discouraged because I'm like, well, usually I can read a book in an evening. And so for a lot of the books that I read for the channel, I'll read them in an evening, maybe two. And that's what allows me to be able to like read a book a week for the channel. I can't do that with Don Quixote. I can't do that with Les Mis. Like, even if I were to split it up the way that I was, it just takes me too long to read the 300-page sections that I don't think I could do it in a week. And because I have a full-time job right now, I don't really have the time outside of what I'm already reading for the channel to read other books for the channel, if that makes sense. So I'm kind of struggling to find the time to keep up my regular cadence of posting once a week and doing videos that involve a little bit more work that might take me longer than a week to make. So I would work on them for multiple weeks, if not months, before putting them out. Now, the Midnight Sun video was one of those, but finding the time to work on it was very challenging. And it was something that I was really trying to like squeeze in there sometimes. And so I guess what I would say is that for the time being, I think it's unrealistic that I will get around to making more videos about Les Mis, but that doesn't mean I'm never gonna do it. I just think my life would have to shift a little bit, and I don't want to give too much information information about that because I don't know who watches these. But I think once I have more time to work on the channel, then it would be a lot more realistic for me to do stuff like that because I'd have more time to work on videos that aren't immediately the video I need to post that week, if that makes sense. And so when I say I will get back to Les Mis, I mean it from the bottom of my heart. I just think it probably won't be for another little bit, but we'll get there. Why am I saying all of that with a Don Quixote question? Well, in my head, I was going to do Les Mis and then Don Quixote. So I do have it. I do want to read it. I will read it eventually, but I gotta finish Les Mis first. At this point, I don't know if I'm gonna go back. I think I probably should. Well, I can maybe rewatch my original video and see if I still stand by it, because if I'm gonna continue it after all this time, should I go and reread the beginning and like remake that video? Because I don't even know if I would stand by half of what I said. But I know I did the whole like French history Barbie bit, which just tells you how long ago I made that video because the Barbie movie was huge at the time. I would just have to go back and rewatch it and see if I feel like it's still accurate to how I feel, and I'm like okay with that being the first installment in the series, and then maybe I would just continue it, or maybe I'll just go back to the beginning, read the whole thing, and make one giant video on it. Not entirely sure. But then after that, I would do Don Quixote, and I think I would also probably split it into parts because Jesus Christ. So anyway, to answer your question, no, I have not read it, but I plan to, and I plan to make a video on it when I do, or multiple. I'm not entirely sure, but probably not for a while. Oh my God, we have so many more. Okay, I've got to start speeding up. What are my thoughts on the Kobo Libra color? Any regrets or tips? I am going to make a full video on the Kobo, so I will give you an in-depth review. I just want to use it for a few months before I do. And so I have a big trip coming up, and so probably after that trip, I'll make the review because then I'll have traveled with it too. But at least as of right now, I don't have any regrets. I'll tell you that. Like, I currently am enjoying using it a lot more and am using it more than I used my old Kindle. I really like having the buttons. Now that I've had the buttons, I don't know that I could go back to not having the buttons. So those are kind of like my gut thoughts, but I'm going to be doing a full in-depth review that I will be posting probably sometime in May if I had to guess, if not like beginning of June. Favorite book to movie adaptation? I saw this question yesterday and I started to think about it, and then I kind of got thinking about something else, and I don't think I ever came up with anything. Favorite book to movie adaptation? I would probably have to say Twilight, just because I could never like not watch Twilight. Like at any given point in time, if you're like, hey Meredith, do you want to watch Twilight? The answer is yes. So I would probably have to say that. But again, I wanted to give you guys like different answers, like understanding that Twilight is that for me. My favorite book series, my favorite book to movie adaptation. What else would make the list? I mean, honestly, probably Hunger Games, but like same rationale, same reasoning for that not being my final answer. Oh, okay, I do have a good answer for this. I actually really thought that the Giver book to movie adaptation was really good, which is interesting because a lot of people felt like it wasn't. I maybe should go back and rewatch it before I say all of this, because I watched it years ago when it came out. But I remember thinking that the hate on it was really misplaced. A lot of people didn't like that they changed a lot of small details. When you're adapting a book to a movie, you are always going to have to change things. They're always going to have to take stuff out. They're always going to have to combine stuff together, because a book is a medium that people will spend, you know, hours and hours and hours reading, whereas a movie, you only have 2 hours to get the story across. You're not going to want to watch a 10-hour movie. So they're always going to have to change stuff. They're always going to have to take stuff out. And it makes sense that they sometimes have to make things more action-packed. When you're inside of a character's internal monologue, then that in and of itself can entertain you, but they can never really put you in the inner monologue in a movie. And so sometimes they need to give you other things to keep you going. So The Giver, the movie adaptation, got a lot of flack from people because they added like a chase sequence and a love interest, and people were like, it's so different from the original book. But to me, the important thing with a book to movie adaptation is, does it get what the original book was trying to get across, and do you get the same feeling and the same message, and do the characters come across the same? And in my opinion, all of that was true with The Giver tenfold. The whole point of The Giver is that it is beautiful to be alive. It is beautiful to be a human being and to experience the range of emotions that humans feel. And sometimes that involves negative emotions, but you cannot have the negative emotions without the positive. And so if you create a world without negative emotion, you create a world without positive emotion too. And that means you take away what it means to be alive. That is the point of The Giver. And that's why it's such a powerful book. That's why it's such an important book. And that's why basically every middle schooler is forced to read it in America, or at least I was, right? And I certainly didn't appreciate it at the time the way that I do now. I reread them voluntarily at some point and was like, man, these are amazing. I hated reading this when I was forced to. And maybe I would again for a video series if you guys were interested in that. Let me know. I thought the movie adaptation told that message in the same way. And so I thought it was really a success. And I thought it was really good. And I remember being kind of angry that people were saying that it wasn't. Dare I say it, y'all have no creativity. Y'all can't think outside the box. You're allergic to it. Not my subscribers, of course. All of us can critically think, and all of us can think outside the box. But there are a lot of people out there that can't, and they just literally want copy paste plot from book to movie. And I think you don't understand how much you don't want that until you see a movie that actually does that. And then you'll understand why you wouldn't actually want that most of the time. Oh, what's my dream collaboration? Oh, this is a fun one. For other content creators, I would say Jack Edwards. I think he's great. And I really like his analysis. Like, he always does a little bit of analysis in his book reviewing, and I really appreciate that as a viewer. And I take his recommendations very seriously, and I, for the most part, have found that I enjoy the books that he recommends. Every once in a while, there's a mismatch. Yeah, I think it would be really fun to collaborate with him. I would love to just like talk about literature in general. And then this is kind of like a random curveball as far as other creators, but I love Jenny Nicholson. I don't know what she and I would make together, but if she ever wanted to collab, I think that would be really fun. Jenny, I love you. And I just love her content. I genuinely think the Church Play Cinematic Universe video is the single funniest video on youtube.com. If you haven't watched it, you absolutely should. There's something in it for everybody. It is hysterical. I have shown that video to so many people, and I have yet to have somebody watch it and be like, man, that was all right. I didn't think it was that funny. I literally think it's a masterpiece. So I love Jenny Nicholson. I think she's fantastic. And if there ever was something that we could come up with that would be a good collab for the two of us, I would absolutely love to make a video with her. I think that would be so fun. But on the collaboration front, I guess I can talk a little bit about like future of the channel, like some ideas that I have and some thoughts that I've had, right? I think that eventually I would love to interview authors because I think that would be really great. And I know that podcasts tend to be the stop for authors when it comes to online content, and you don't see a whole lot of like YouTubers interviewing authors, or at least I have not seen a ton of that. Maybe there are creators that do that. If there are, can you guys link me to them? But I have not found that sort of thing. I would love to like do that. I think that would be really fun. And I think the style of content I normally make lends itself to that because I make videos where I just talk for an hour and I don't put a ton of editing in. I basically make podcasts. I've had requests from people to just upload the audio to Spotify. I haven't started doing that because, again, I only have so much time to work on this channel in my day. So there's a lot of stuff that I really want to do that's kind of on my like when sort of list, where it's like when I have more time, I would love to work this in. And so in the back of my mind, part of that is always uploading the audio of my videos to Spotify as well, if people would rather listen to them more as a podcast, because I basically don't put any edits in. So you're not going to miss anything if you're missing the visual, except my face. I get it. I'm just talking basically. So like I get people wanting it just on audio, and I do have the thought to do that eventually. That just would be a lot more work per video to get that all set up. And so I would need to figure that out, like exporting the audio separately and then uploading it. It probably wouldn't be like that much more work, but still trying not to burn out. You know what I mean? But anyway, all of that to say, I think it kind of lends itself to doing author interviews, because then I could just interview an author for like an hour and my audience is already primed to just listen to somebody talk for an hour about books. And so I think it kind of lends itself to that sort of thing as well. So I would love to interview authors. Dream authors to interview: Suzanne Collins, top of that list. Suzanne, I don't know if you or anyone from your team is watching this, but boy, howdy, would I love the opportunity to interview you. I have so many questions. I would love to be able to do that. Stephanie Meyer is another big one. Obviously, I'm shooting for the moon here. These are pretty famous authors I'm listing. But the thing about Stephanie Meyer, I've joked about this so many times. I fear I've maybe come across as one of those people that's like, I live in Scottsdale, because I've like brought it up. But I bring it up as a bit because not only do both Stephanie Meyer and actually Diana Gabaldon, the author of Outlander, they both don't just only live in the Phoenix metropolitan area. They both live in Scottsdale. And for some reason, when articles are like written about them and where they're based, they always specify that they're based in Scottsdale. I'm not sure why, but I also live in Scottsdale, which is like a town, if you will, in the Phoenix metropolitan area. And so I live probably within a 20 or 30 minute drive of both of them. And so I've joked through my Twilight series about like feeling the vibes in the air from Stephanie Meyer, because I breathe the same air as her. But like, all jokes aside, if anybody is watching this from Stephanie's team, again, I don't know why you would, but if there were another Twilight book coming out at any point and you wanted to do some kind of like easy press surrounding the announcement of the book, and you needed somebody that was within a driving distance of Stephenie Meyer, that will totally drive to her, and I have all the gear and I could just set everything up super easy and do an interview, and she doesn't have to travel. And I pinky promise she could send me a list of questions she doesn't want to be asked, and I wouldn't ask any of them. I won't ask her about how the vampires impregnate humans. I won't ask her about the logistics behind any of that. I have significantly more deep questions I would want to ask her about the series, and I think it could be a really great interview. Just shooting my shot if anybody's out there watching. Just saying I'm like practically her neighbor and it would be so easy. Same with Diana Gabaldon. If for some reason Diana Gabaldon wants to do some like easy press, she wouldn't have to travel. And if they're not comfortable giving me their address, they are welcome at my home. Boy, would I freak out if they came here. But if they would rather drive to me, it would only be like a 20-minute drive, and then they don't have to give me their address. And I would totally do that. So yeah, I think that could be really fun. So those would be like, if you're saying like dream collaborations, like my dream creator collaborations are Jack Edwards and Jenny Nicholson, and my dream author collaborations would be Suzanne Collins and Stephenie Meyer. George R.R. Martin would be fun too, just because man, is he so unique in his writing. So I think it would be cool to talk to him. And I'll throw Brandon Sanderson on the list because I do think it would be very interesting to talk to him. I did really enjoy Stormlight. I want to read more of stuff he's read. I just haven't gotten around to it. I would love to pick his brain about writing because he just is so prolific. And I also know that he does a lot of online stuff. Like, he is one of the only authors that I feel like I regularly see collaborating with YouTubers. He's a phenomenal author and I would love to interview him. And I actually think it's most realistic that I would get to. I think with Brandon Sanderson, it's like if I got to a certain size, they would think it was worth it. And I definitely think I could get an interview with him. I think with like Stephenie Meyer or Suzanne Collins' team, I would have to like convince them that being in a YouTube video would be good press for them. I don't think I would have to do that convincing with Brandon Sanderson's team. Is there anyone? I mean, there's a million authors. I would love to interview Min Jin Lee. I would love to interview Carmen Maria Machado. I would love to interview Helen Huang, who does the Kiss Quotient series. I would love to interview, I mentioned Diana Gabaldon already. Emily Henry, oh my God, I would die. I already said Suzanne Collins. God, there's so many authors I would love to interview. Oh, Ashley, a deep cut. I can't believe I didn't recommend this. I'm gonna amend my like favorite book sort of recommendation. I have a new favorite. It came out of nowhere. It kind of hit me over the head, but a novel love story by Ashley Poston. I hope I'm saying that right. I didn't look up her name beforehand because I didn't realize I was gonna talk about her, but a novel love story is like truly one of the most beautiful contemporary romances I've ever read. And it's a recent read. It came out this year and it was phenomenal. I want to pick up more of her stuff. I just haven't had time. I think she has other books out. I don't think that was her debut, but it was stunning. If you're looking for a contemporary romance recommendation, 10 out of 10, no notes, 5-star, immediate favorite. And I read that a few months ago and I just like, I've never been so floored in my life. I've never been so surprised. I thought it was gonna be like goofy and fun and silly, and it ended up being profound. So yeah, I'd like to interview her too, because I have a million questions about that book specifically. Okay, if you had to cancel a fruit, which one has to go? Fruit. I love berries. It definitely wouldn't be a berry. Big fan of blueberries, big fan of raspberries, strawberries. If it has the word berry in it, probably love it. Blackberries. Big fan of melons as well. Oh, you know, I don't really like, what are the green ones called? Not a big fan of the green melons. Honeydew. Yeah, it's just uninteresting to me. Like, I don't find them to be offensive. If I saw a honeydew, I wouldn't be like, how dare you? I wouldn't like avoid eating it, but I just find them to be the least appealing to me of the fruits. I wouldn't say that there's a fruit that I'm like, ugh, I really hate that fruit. And so I think honeydew just being a fruit, I'm not really drawn to. Like, if I never ate a honeydew again, I wouldn't like be sad about that. I think nothing of them. They taste like nothing to me. Top 3 book series you read as a youngin': Twilight, Hunger Games. I would have to say Harry Potter. I am going to do a video on Harry Potter that will not avoid the elephant in the room. I will not be avoiding the topic of the author that shall not be named, but I really want to approach that video carefully because of, you know, you're familiar. So there's a lot that I would want to do with that video that, again, it's kind of on my list of like, when I have more time, eventually I will talk about that, especially with me going through young adult novels. Harry Potter is an obvious choice, but there's obvious reasons why I've been avoiding it. And I think that's why nobody's really asked me about it. I was kind of expecting that by this point, somebody would be like, yo, when are you going to do Harry Potter? But I think a lot of people are kind of understanding as to why I've avoided it. So I'm not going to avoid it forever. I will eventually talk about it. I just think that when I do, I want to approach it with care. And I have an idea that I think would be really good for it. And so I just would need time to make that video. So you will get that from me eventually, but probably, again, not for a while. I said Twilight and Hunger Games. Let me give you some others because like I said, talked about those a lot. Percy Jackson's sitting right here. I want to do a series on Percy Jackson eventually. I loved the Percy Jackson books. I have zero memories of the movies. I literally don't think I watched them, or maybe I watched the first one, but I did read the books and I did really like them and I read them multiple times. So Percy Jackson for sure. Warrior Cats. I loved Warrior Cats as a kid. So Warrior Cats, huge. I want to do a video on Warrior Cats as well. I haven't quite fully baked that one out, but I do want to do a video on Warrior Cats. And should I pick another one? What's another? Magic Treehouse I read a lot of. And are there any like deep cuts? Are there any like weird ones that like I remember that I don't ever hear other people talk about? Oh my God, I have 2% battery. Okay, we have to wrap this up. Oh God, we have to be so fast because, okay, cool. I only have 2 questions left. One of them is, did you read 50 Shades in high school because of peer pressure like me, or were you normal? The answer is I did read it because of peer pressure, but it wasn't until I was an adult. So I somehow managed to avoid it when it was like gigantic when I was in high school, and I just never read it. I just refused because it was really popular, and I think I was just being, I'm different, I don't want to read that, I don't want to read that. So I did not read it in high school, but I did read it 3 or 4 years ago at the pressure of my roommates at the time, who found out that I had never read it and were like, what? So I did read it, and then I watched all the movies with them. It was because of peer pressure, but I was like 23 or 24. And would you consider doing a video on Wuthering Heights? I do eventually want to get back into doing classics, and once I get through Les Mis and Don Quixote, I am open to really any classic that you guys are interested in seeing me read. So I could totally do something like a breakdown of Wuthering Heights, because I know it's really confusing. So I could do my best to like do some kind of breakdown or something like that. Would love. But again, that's something that I would probably need more time to work into the schedule. So just be patient with me. We've got a lot of plans. We got a lot of growth. Just going back to why I made this video, I cannot believe we're at 10K. It's actually crazy that we've gotten here. Every time any of you watches any of my videos, I'm just amazed. And so I just can't thank you guys enough for all of your support, all of your love. It means the world to me. I love you guys. I cannot wait to continue growing this channel with you. I have so many ideas. We're gonna have so much fun. Definitely stick around. You're not gonna miss what I have coming down the pipeline. I love you guys, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.